The day my own son sent me away with $700,000 of his debt in my name, I thought that was the end of me. 1 month later, I'm clutching a $50 million lottery ticket while a news van idles at the curb and Jason rings my doorbell with that practiced smile I've learned to fear. The porch light hums, Florida heat sticks to my skin, and the paper in my hand feels thick, almost waxy, like money already. Neighbors hover behind hedges. A cameraman adjusts his lens, and I can taste the metal of adrenaline on my tongue. Through the glass, I see my son's eyes flick to the envelope, then to the cameras, then back to me, calculating. "Mom," he mouths, as if the word might open a safe. "My name is Margaret Collins. I'm 66, and the last time we faced each other, it was across his granite kitchen island under cold, recessed lights. Late notices fanned out like a bad hand of cards. A notary's stamp thudded beside my elbow, and Jason kept tapping a pen where he wanted my signature. Bridge loan, just for a month. You know I'd never let anything happen to you." His wife stared into her phone. The baby monitor hissed softly. The air smelled like lemon cleaner and panic. When I hesitated, he leaned in, jaw tight, voice low. "Don't be dramatic, Mom. Sign it. Don't make me choose." The ink bled, my name curled, and by nightfall I was in a budget motel off I-95, my phone silent except for the credit alerts. The winning moment wasn't fireworks, it was fluorescent. A 7-Eleven at dusk, freezer humming, stale coffee steaming, the clerk humming along to country radio. I fed the ticket into the scanner, and that little machine gave a polite chime before flashing, "See clerk." He blinked, scanned again, and his ma'am cracked into a whisper as the numbers lined up. The manager locked the door, someone handed me water, and I just stood there, staring at the printout with my hands shaking so hard the paper rattled. Outside, the sky opened with one of those sudden summer rains, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something like air in my lungs. If you're wondering how a mother goes from signing away her house to standing on a porch with reporters and a son who only knocks when there's a check, I'll tell you exactly how those 30 days unfolded. The kindnesses that kept me afloat. The stranger who insisted on that ticket, the call that changed everything, and the call I never expected to make. If you believe second chances can find you in the unlikeliest places, hit subscribe and stay with me. The porch light hummed like it always did when the heat settled in and the palmettos stilled, and the paper in my hand felt thick, a little waxy, as if the ink could soak into my skin. Down by the curb, the news van idled and threw a weak blue wash across the azaleas I never could get to grow. Jason was on the other side of the glass, ringing again, that practiced smile already set. His eyes cutting to the envelope, then to the cameras, then back to me. Behind our hedges, I could see Mrs. Alvarez from 2 houses over, standing with her little dog. Someone whispered my name. The cameraman adjusted his lens and tilted his head so he could catch both our faces, mother and son, the way a fisherman angles the net, just so. My name is Margaret Collins. I am 66 years old. The last time Jason and I squared off, it was across his granite island in a kitchen that always smelled like lemon cleaner and ambition. He fanned late notices in a tidy rainbow and kept tapping the pen where he wanted me to sign. "Bridge loan, Mom. 30 days. You know I'd never let anything happen to you." His wife stared into her phone, the baby monitor hissed, and there was something slick to the whole performance, how he angled himself between me and the door, how he lowered his voice when I hesitated. "Don't be dramatic. Sign it. Don't make me choose." The notary's stamp thudded like a gavel. My name curled on paper I didn't even want to read again, and by nightfall, I was in a budget motel off I-95 with a plastic ice bucket, a TV that hummed louder than it spoke, and a phone that lit up only to tell me someone else had discovered how much I owed. It is a particular kind of quiet that exists along the interstate in North Florida. Trucks sigh. Frogs start up like squeaky hinges at dusk. The motel desk clerk sings to herself as she wraps the morning rosemary bagels in plastic. I woke each day in that small square of a room with the stiff floral bedspread and the buzzing air conditioner and tried to remember I was not a problem to be solved. Routine became a raft. I made coffee in the little machine until it sputtered brown. I walked around the retention pond behind the motel where ibis picked at the grass and an egret stood like a porcelain figurine. I called the bank to ask them, again, to explain how my son had put $700,000 in my name and then let the dates slide past, one by one, as if rent notices were storm clouds that would blow over. "Ma'am," one of the men said on the phone, softening in the way people do when the script doesn't fit anymore, "the loan is legally yours." I learned how Florida mornings repeat themselves until something breaks the pattern. I took the bus to the library and tried to catch my breath among the stacks. My hands remembered what to do with books, the way the spines feel like promises. For 31 years, I'd been a school librarian in Jacksonville, reading Charlotte's Web and Where the Red Fern Grows, and telling children they would be surprised to discover how brave they were. I called those memories up like prayer. In late afternoons, I sat in the diner next to the motel and ate a bowl of grits with a pat of butter and a sprinkle of pepper and listened to the retired men talk about fishing tides. On Sundays, I walked to St. Luke's with a hat I'd steamed back into shape and sang even when my throat felt like it had stones in it. Louise from the pew behind me pressed my hand and didn't ask questions. She knew about the way one person can hold your name hostage. I had taught Jason to tie his shoes while we waited on the number 4 bus, taught him to ride a two-wheeler in the parking lot behind the church, taught him how to cook an egg and fold a shirt and steer through a thunderstorm with the radio low. When his father died, Jason was 11 and so furious at the world he went still. He had my eyes and his father's jaw, and he turned both into armor. A woman at our church slipped me an envelope with $40 in it that winter, for school shoes, and I swore I would pay the world back. I worked the book fair on Fridays to earn scholastic coupons I pretended Jason won. I took summers in the children's room at the main branch downtown and lived on Publix chicken salad and canned peaches. I sold the sapphire ring my mother had left me for Jason's last semester at UF when the college office told me it was either that or a fee for late tuition. When he started his marketing firm out in Riverside, he brought me to see the warehouse with string lights hung at the rafters and told me if I took a little equity out of the house, he could bring in 2 new clients and be set by Christmas. "It's leverage, Mom, not debt," he said, and put his arm around me so I would feel like we were on the same team. It is astonishing how 1,000 little good intentions can grow into one big problem that parks itself on your chest. In his late 20s, when Jason first called me Margaret at a restaurant in San Marco in front of his friends, I laughed it off. When he told me not to tell his investors I was a librarian, I listened. When he rolled his eyes at my green Buick and offered to take it off my hands and put me into something nicer, as soon as cash flow catches up, I said I was fine. When bills came, I said, "Give it a minute." When that last month came with the bridge loan, I wanted so badly to be the mother who believed. The ink bled, my name curled, and then I learned what it meant to be the one left holding the rope. At the motel, the carpet smelled like old rain. The first night, Letitia at the desk handed me extra towels and a smile that went all the way up to her eyes. "You let me know if you need anything, Miss Margaret," she said, like my name could still fit me. On the second morning, the construction crew staying 2 rooms down offered me half a box of donuts, like an apology for being loud before dawn. On the third, Louise left a Tupperware of casserole at my door with a note, "Eat, sleep. Call me if the sky falls." I learned how to take help without apologizing for needing it. There is a dignity in saying thank you that I should have learned sooner. On the 18th day, after a call from a debt collector who asked me if I had any jewelry worth listing, I took my old Buick for what I thought might be our last ride together. It was August heat, and the air was stalled, and the clouds had that bruise color that means a summer storm will come no matter what you have planned. I drove slowly down Phillips Highway because the taillight had been cracked for years and I could not afford a ticket. I pulled into a 7-Eleven because I needed a bottle of water to quiet the dizzy that had begun to live behind my eyes. Inside, everything hummed: freezers, coffee, a country song on the radio about dirt roads and good hearts. The fluorescent lights made everyone look like they'd been washed in milk. I was counting quarters when the woman behind me tapped my elbow. She had a scrunchie in her hair and paint dots on both hands, 2 different shades, like she'd been trying to decide what color a day could be. "Ma'am," she said, "you want me to get this?" "I've got it," I said quickly, pulling a dime out of the pocket where I keep lint and luck. I was embarrassed to be counting change in a place where teenagers buy energy drinks without blinking. Her eyes flicked down to my hands and then back up. "I like to believe the universe keeps tallies," she said, and before I could stop her, she used 2 fingers to slide a $5 bill toward the clerk. "And I like to believe it has a sense of humor." The clerk laughed and shook his head. "You'd be surprised." I don't know why I said it. Maybe because the storm outside had that smell the ground gets before it gives up and lets itself be soaked. Maybe because I had just watched my name become a kind of currency I didn't recognize. Maybe because somewhere in me I was still the girl who bought a raffle ticket for the quilt at the church picnic just to hear the old ladies say, "Well, you never know." I pointed at the counter behind the gum where the lotto slips wait in their little acrylic stand. "Throw in a quick pick." "Make it 2, the woman said, and wiggled the 5. "1 for you, 1 for me." The clerk fed the slip into the machine, and it sang its little song. He handed me a piece of paper that felt like a grocery receipt, thin and unimportant. I tucked it into my wallet like a bookmark. The woman tapped her slip against the counter twice like a spell and laughed as she stepped out into the fat first drops of rain. I never even got her name, though I would replay the way her mouth moved around that small kindness for weeks, as if learning a dance. When the numbers came up on the little screen 2 weeks later, it wasn't fireworks. It was that same 7-Eleven at dusk, freezer humming, stale coffee steaming, the clerk humming along to a song that had been on the radio for 20 years. I slid the ticket into the scanner. The machine chimed politely. "See, clerk," it said. The clerk looked up like he was braced for trouble, and then glanced down and blinked and scanned again. "Ma'am," he said, and in that moment his voice broke in a way that made him sound like my students in those old summers when they lost their first tooth, amazed at what their bodies could do. Everything after that turned into a soft blur. The manager locked the door like he'd been trained to do for hurricanes. Someone handed me a bottle of water. Someone said, "You need to sign the back." My hands shook so hard, the printout rattled. The sky outside opened and dumped water in sheets heavy enough to bend the palms. The manager said the lottery would call me. The lottery did. A woman with a crisp voice told me to keep the ticket safe, to take a breath, to write my name in small, careful letters where it told me to. "Do not talk to anyone you do not have to," she said, and I almost laughed because that's a habit I had already formed. "There will be a process," she said. "You choose lump sum or annuity. You bring 2 forms of ID. You don't have to meet the press." Florida being Florida, I knew my name would live in a file somewhere, but she told me recent changes meant I could keep it quiet for a while. 90 days, if you'd like that." 90 days sounds lovely," I said, and when I heard my voice, I realized I was crying. My tears made no sound. They were just there, the way the ocean is just there when you come over the dunes and cannot believe you forgot it while you were away. The call I never expected to make came later that night, when the rain had spent itself and the air was hot and clean. I sat in my car with the ticket in a plain white envelope tucked under the driver's manual, right where nobody would think to look for it, because nobody ever reads those. I called a number Louise had pressed into my hand months earlier when a woman at church had her grandson dip into her savings, just until a settlement came through. "If you ever need someone who knows where words go," she'd said, "call this man." He was an attorney out in Riverside, a man named Raj Patel, who wore bow ties without irony and whose office smelled like real paper. I told him everything, including the part where I had let my son turn my name into a raft he did not intend to float. I told him about the bridge loan and the motel, and the way my hands had memorized fear. Then I told him about the ticket. He was quiet for a long breath, the kind of pause that does not try to fill itself with noise. "Mrs. Collins," he said finally, "congratulations, and I am very sorry." The 2 were knotted together in a way the rest of the world might not understand. He told me I should come by in the morning. He told me we would set up a trust, that we would put walls where there had been none. He told me I needed to change my phone number. He told me if I wanted, we could file a report with Adult Protective Services, not because I wanted my son marched in front of someone with a clipboard, but because language matters and the words financial exploitation needed to stop being something I only used in my head. "Bring the ticket," he said. "Bring your courage. We'll handle the rest as it arrives." I did not sleep that night. I watched the ceiling fan strobe the room and replayed the years in order like flashcards I had to shuffle through to pass a test. The time Jason refused to sit with me at senior night at his baseball banquet because he wanted to sit with the boosters whose sons would help him network. The time he told me not to bring my casserole to his friend's Christmas potluck because they don't really do potlucks. The afternoon he typed passwords into my computer for me, fast as a magician, and said, "You shouldn't worry about online stuff. That's not your skill set." The day he rolled his eyes when I said I couldn't just move into a condo in his building because I had a life where I was. 1,000 moments when I rode the tide of his impatience because I thought that was what love required. At dawn, the same thrum of trucks on I-95 came back, and I realized my life had not become something unrecognizable. It was still a Florida morning. I still knew how to make hotel coffee and brush my teeth and pull a cardigan over pajamas and sign my name in small, careful letters. The ticket in the envelope under my manual was just ink on paper until I decided what it meant. The news van did not come because I called it. It came because the store did what it had to do and called who they were supposed to call, and because in a town like ours, nothing stays secret once air has touched it. A reporter with a cheerful voice and white sneakers appeared on the sidewalk out front like she'd been dropped there by a crane. Neighbors gathered with the same quiet, greedy curiosity we all pretend we don't have. I pulled into my driveway and sat there with my hands on the wheel and remembered to take one more breath. Then I walked to my front door and got as far as the porch light before the doorbell started, urgent and clean. Jason looked tan and rested and important. There are smiles that lift a face from the eyes, and then there are smiles that are engraved like instructions. His was the second kind. Behind him on the walkway stood 2 men I recognized from his office, the ones who call themselves strategists and wear beards like they graduated into them. They carried nothing and everything. The reporter's hair shone. The cameraman peered through the glass of my door and adjusted his focus. The azaleas vibrated in the heat. "Mom," Jason mouthed, and if I hadn't known him my whole life, I might have thought the word held a tenderness. He tapped the door with the flat of his hand, that little quick rhythm he had as a boy when he was hungry and pretending he was not. I could see the envelope reflected in the glass, my own fingers curled around it. It would have been so easy to open the door like a storybook, to hear my son say "you won," the way people do in those commercials where confetti rains out of the ceiling. It would have been easy to step into a role I had perfected over decades, the mother who makes a soft place to land. But I had done that. I had baked lasagnas and stood in bleachers and paid fees I couldn't afford with a face that said I could. Easy had a cost I had finally itemized. Through the glass, I watched Jason's eyes tick to the cameras, the envelope, the cameras again. His jaw tightened in that way that used to make me anxious because it meant he would decide something for both of us. This is the thing about a practiced smile. Once you've learned to fear it, you cannot unlearn the lesson. I stepped back from the door. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pressed the number Mr. Patel had programmed into my new phone with his own hands that morning. A sheriff's non-emergency line, he had suggested, just in case you want someone in uniform to make everything feel more official. My voice did not tremble. "There are reporters outside my house," I said, "and my son. I would like a deputy." "Are you safe, ma'am?" the woman asked. I looked around at the house that had held me for 23 years, at the Afghan on the sofa, and the framed photograph of my school's reading night with a line of second graders dressed as book characters. I made a small inventory. I had locks that worked, a dog-eared cookbook on the counter, geraniums that refused to die. I had a manila folder on my dining table with documents in neat tabs: trust draft, loan documents, report. I had a friend who would sit with me tonight if I asked. "I am," I said. "I would like it if someone made sure I stayed that way." The doorbell rang again. Jason's smile was correct. The reporter cleared her throat. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower started and shut off. I caught sight of myself in the glass. White hair pulled back, skin darker on the forearms from the summer walks around the pond. A woman who had learned in 1 month more than she had learned in the last 10 years. Here is what I haven't said outright, because I have been trying to be careful with my own heart. When I signed that loan, Jason leaned close enough that I could see the new freckles across his nose, and I smelled the aftershave he used to borrow from his father when he was 15 and wanted to feel older than he was. "Don't make me choose," he said. He meant, "Don't make me choose between you and the story I am telling about myself." He meant, "Don't make me choose and discover what you're worth to me." He was choosing now, too, with his smile and his position on my porch, and the way he had called the news, but pretended he hadn't. People use words like narrative when what they mean is control. I pulled the chain lock on the door and opened it the length of my hand. The heat pressed in. The smell of night-blooming jasmine from Mrs. Alvarez's porch walked itself into my house without asking permission. "Mom," Jason said out loud this time, bright and boyish, the way he used to sound when we drove down to St. Augustine and he begged for a root beer float. "Hey," he laughed like we were sharing a joke. "You're a lucky lady." He angled his body just enough so the cameras could catch both our faces. He had always known how to occupy space, so nobody else could rearrange it. "Jason," I said, and watched his name land where it had not landed in years, on the threshold, not in the kitchen where his voice could bounce around and bounce me with it. "It's a hot night." He laughed again, a little too loud. "Mom, can I come in? We should talk. We have a plan, okay? The team," he gestured toward the men with beards without looking at them, "they can help. You know how it is. Taxes, structures, it's complicated." I thought about the way he'd said leverage like it was a gift he was giving me. I thought about the word complicated and how men like him used it to slide past the part where someone could ask a question. The reporter leaned in like a flower to light. "Not right now," I said. "I have an attorney." There is a hush that arrives when a word is not expected. Attorney hung in the humid air and made the camellias seem to listen. Jason's smile didn't drop. It just paused, as if someone had cut the power and he was running on battery. "Mom," he said again, soft, and there it was, the tilt, the voice he uses when he is about to convince a client to buy something they do not need. "You don't want to make this messy. Those people—" He nodded toward the reporter with his chin as if she were a plastic flamingo. "They don't need to hear family stuff." "I agree," I said, "which is why you can call Mr. Patel in the morning. He'll be happy to set a time." "The lottery moves fast," one of the bearded men said, deploying a grin like chum. "You'll want to make some decisions right away." "I have made a few," I said, and it surprised me how steady my voice felt, how the words came like stepping stones in the dark that you can feel with your feet if you are patient. I thought of the list notched in my mind and on the piece of legal paper in my dining room. Replace the green Buick's taillight. Pay off the mortgage I had put on my own back with my own belief. Use a piece of the windfall to start a scholarship fund in my husband's name for boys in our neighborhood who forget they are allowed to be kind and strong at the same time. Take Louise to St. Augustine for shrimp and sweet tea, where the breeze comes off the Matanzas River. Buy my granddaughter a college bond in her own name and a bookcase of her own. Call Adult Protective Services and save another woman from thinking the word mother cancels out the words I deserve better. I also thought of a smaller, sharper list, like the one I used to make before parent-teacher conferences so I would not forget anything in the rush. Change the locks. Change the will. Change the story. The deputy pulled up with the quiet shudder that makes everyone look without deciding to. He stepped out, nodded at me, nodded at the reporter, and stood with a presence that made my porch feel like a place with rules. "Ma'am," he said through the gap. "Everything all right this evening?" "It is," I said. "We're all going to be very decent to one another." He settled himself by the mailbox and pretended not to hear the way the cameraman's battery clicked, not to see the way Jason shifted from foot to foot. He looked over at the azaleas, and said something to Mrs. Alvarez about the Jaguars game, and she laughed in that astonished way people do when the ordinary shows up to keep you company during something extraordinary. "Mom," Jason said, and now the word frayed. "You can't do this." He kept his voice low. "You can't shut me out. This is family," I finished for him, a little more gently than I thought I could. "Yes, and we will handle it like a family, with clear boundaries and good manners. I will be delighted to see you Friday at Mr. Patel's office at 10 in the morning. Bring every piece of paper you have regarding that bridge loan. Bring copies of anything you had me sign. Bring your irresistible charm." The bearded men shifted. One of them tried the smile again. I held up a hand. I watched Jason's face flicker between the version of himself he uses in rooms full of money and the boy in the bleachers whose father did not come. For a second, and then another. We were both humans on a porch in Florida, with Jasmine breathing, and a news van idling, and a deputy looking steadily at a patch of grass. I could feel the envelope like an animal in my hand. It had weight and heat and the possibility of doing harm if it ran without a leash. I thought of the stranger in the 7-Eleven, with paint on her hands, and the way she said the universe has a sense of humor. I thought of the night after Jason was born, when I sat on the porch of our first rental and watched bugs fling themselves toward the light again, and remembered what my mother had told me. The trick is not to confuse warmth with invitation. The light doesn't owe you anything. It's just there. "I will not discuss money on my front porch," I said, prim in a way that used to make my students giggle. "I will not let the news make us a spectacle. I will not be interviewed tonight." The reporter tilted her neck in a small surrender, then stepped back. The cameraman lowered his camera. The deputy turned his head and took in the symmetry. Jason's smile reassembled itself, but now it was work. He laughed, but no sound came out of him. He pressed his palm to the door like he used to when he was small, and asked for seconds. "I love you," I said, "because I do. Not the version of love that erases my name, but the version that sees us both clearly. I am still your mother. That has not been loaned out. You know I would never let anything happen to you," he said, and I did not say, "But you already did." There is a mercy in not narrating every bruise. He looked to the cameras one last time and then lowered his eyes. "Friday," he said tightly. "Friday," I echoed. They left in a little cluster, as if the humidity could tangle itself around ankles, as if the night might tug. The van dipped into the streetlight's circle and then out. Mrs. Alvarez's little dog shook itself, and the sound made the air less ceremonial. The deputy tipped his hat as if we were standing beside hay bales at a county fair instead of in a neighborhood where the HOAs measure your grass. "You all right, ma'am?" "I am," I said, and in that moment I understood something small and freeing. Relief feels a lot like ordinary. The porch light hummed. The cicadas tuned up. Somewhere a child was put to bed and called out for one more glass of water. Somewhere, the woman with paint on her palms rinsed her hands and didn't know she'd saved a stranger. Inside, in the kitchen where I had once made spaghetti for a boy who would not look me in the eye when he asked for the extra $5 for a field trip, I set the envelope on the counter. I made tea the way my mother taught me. I stood with the cup in my hands and listened to the house speak in the small language it uses when the doors and windows are shut and the air conditioner is catching its breath. The manila folder on the dining table lay open. Mr. Patel's notes in his neat hand. Trust, scholarship, retitle home, deputy for peace of mind as needed, statement of facts, timeline for APS, letter to bank. I had given up so many small things over the years and called it care. New shoes, a trip I wanted to take up to Savannah to see the squares in spring. The way I always put my needs at the end of the list because I was the mother, and that's what mothers do. I thought about meatloaf that stretched 3 nights and the times I used expired coupons anyway and smiled at the cashier until she scanned them. I thought about the night storms that roll through Florida and how the air after is heavier and better because it has done what it needed to do. There will be more. Paper to sign that is mine and no one else's. Calls that are brave and long. Conversations that will press on bruises I did not know I still kept. Jason will arrive at Mr. Patel's with his lake blue eyes and his jaw set and a willingness to argue the past. There will be a way to love him without letting him yank me by the hand and call it dancing. There will be all the ways to spend money, and I will have to choose against being the kind of person who believes a stack of bills can undo 30 years of muscle memory. I finished my tea. I wrapped the envelope in a kitchen towel like a fragile loaf coming out of the oven, not because it needed warmth, but because I did. I placed it in the small fireproof lockbox Mr. Patel had pressed into my hands as I left his office that afternoon. You would have thought he was handing me a kitten the way he watched to make sure I held it right. I slid the lockbox into the bottom drawer of the pantry, behind a stack of old cookbooks with recipes for things I have long since made by heart. I closed the door. The house breathed. I turned out the porch light, and the hum stopped, and the silence after was a cool lake. I walked back to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the photograph on my dresser of Jason at 7 with a front tooth missing and the gold of a Florida sunset behind him. And I let myself hold that boy in my chest for a minute, separate from the man on my porch who smiles like a plan. Then I took a pen from the nightstand and wrote on a small card in the tidy librarian script that has survived everything. Friday, 10 a.m., firm boundaries, kind words, no shame. Underneath I wrote, slowly, as if the act could make it true, I am allowed to be okay. Outside, somewhere beyond the reach of the porch light, a frog began his steady metronome. In the morning, I would drive to the DMV with 2 forms of ID. I would have coffee with Louise on her patio and let her correct my posture with the same fierce love she uses on her roses. I would buy a new light bulb for the lamp in the living room because somehow, in all the big things, that had burned out too. The newspaper would be full of someone else's trouble. The azaleas would refuse to bloom, and the jasmine would be insistent, and the world would do what it always has done. Wake, adjust, go on. And Friday would come, and with it the particular mercy of a door I could open into a room with a table, 2 chairs, and a man with a bow tie who says, "Let's begin where you are today." I will never forget the sensation of my bare feet on motel carpet, the way the fibers clung with ghostly damp even after the cleaning crew passed twice a week, the lingering scent of lemon and rain, and the peculiar hush that swelled after dusk when the ice machine cranked on and the grackle outside my window began calling for mates I never saw. Each of those 30 days had pressed its thumb against me, stamped small humiliations into the softest corners of my daily life. They returned to me as I stood by the kitchen window, looking through gray glass at the twin cones of light from the news van. Envelope still clutched in my palm like a talisman, my son outside rehearsing the role of a caring boy before an invisible audience. You learn about injustice in increments, never one single thunderclap, but a steady accumulation of missed phone calls, bills you didn't spend, words that slip sideways. I remember the week after Jason's bridge loan, my bridge loan, stamped and notarized in navy blue ink, when the first letter arrived from a creditor I had never heard of, referencing a security agreement I don't remember reading. I called the number, voice small with dread, and an efficient woman told me I was responsible for the full balance, but she could offer me compassionate payment plans. There was something chilling in the way she made mercy sound like arithmetic. On Tuesday, I returned to my old house to collect a few things, just an old quilt, 2 cookbooks with splattered pages, and a photo of Jason when he was 7, the last year his smile belonged to me alone. My own neighbors, people whose dogs I'd watched on vacation, averted their eyes. I felt the weight of what cannot be said, a mother, displaced and exposed, left behind by her own kin. At the budget motel, I learned to nod graciously when Letitia offered fresh towels to thank the construction men for their half-stale coffee after the morning shift. Each kindness shone like a thin edge of silver in the mounting gloom. But the real injustices pressed deepest at night. Lying awake in the narrow bed, I would replay the sharp stings of Jason's voice. How at 12 he bristled at my presence at parent conferences, silenced my advice on high school essays with a mock patient, "Mom, please." How he stopped inviting me to team dinners, even as I sat in the stands with a thermos while other mothers were welcomed, prized for their fudge or their laughter. I told myself to be grateful. He was ambitious, successful, promising. When Jason called me by my first name at his firm's opening, I smiled as if it were a small slip, not the start of erasure. That last summer before the loan, he stopped answering my Friday calls. He arrived at Thanksgiving with hands full of flowers and phone full of texts. Always an apology, always a reason to leave before we'd even finished the pie. He missed his daughter's reading night at school, said he had a client dinner. When his wife, Amanda, texted me photos of the baby with new shoes, or was it a new stroller, I felt like a foreign visitor being offered souvenirs. In every small exclusion, a little humiliation caught fire, flared, and tucked itself away without release. Shame is a quiet limb. Even among good people, those who pressed money into my palm, dropped food at my door, said, "If you need anything, let me know." I felt the urge to edit, soften, apologize for the shape of my trouble. At the Food Lion, I caught the eye of a retired principal from my old school. She blinked, quickly masked sympathy with talk of book drives. I signed up for a temporary library card and stood by the children's section, watching toddlers build towers with foam bricks. I wondered how long it would be before I was seen as that mother, the one who lost everything. One humid afternoon, not long before the storm, I trudged across the parking lot in scuffed sandals, searching for a place that felt like my own. My Buick, older than most children in the lot, started only after 3 tries. The dashboard clock blinked the wrong time. A metaphor, I told myself, for everything I had lost. My hands shook so hard I could not undo the cap on a bottle of aspirin. I rested my forehead on the steering wheel and whispered, "Enough, enough." But I still thought of Jason. Maybe he'd call, maybe he'd fix it, maybe he'd remember how to be my boy. Each hope was another injustice. One more splinter driven deep. The night I won the lottery remains fluorescent in memory, chilling in its ordinariness. Cold air inside the 7-Eleven, odor of scorched coffee, music warbling something sentimental. Counting coins for water and, half in jest, adding a quick pick because the kindness of a stranger had pricked through my embarrassment. "The universe has a sense of humor," she said, and her laugh pressed into the space behind my ribs. I clung to those words, not knowing they would become the hinge on which my life would swing. When the numbers came, everything rearranged itself inside me. The printout trembled, the clerk's voice sputtered into reverence, and a part of me, tired, bruised, steeled by the month, remained unconvinced. I kept the ticket close, not because I saw a life of riches, but because I needed a symbol, finally, that something could change. In that motel room, with 1,000 indignities accumulated into a burden I could now measure, I sat in the low blue lamplight and looked at that scrap of paper. Thick, waxy, real. Money, possibly, but more, the proof that fortune intersects with misfortune, that sometimes the universe indeed tallies and corrects. This ticket became my object, tucked in the velvet pouch that once held my mother's sapphire, now repurposed for something less sentimental but no less valuable. Each night, I slid the pouch under my pillow and whispered, "You are for me, not for Jason, not for what's owed, for me." But fortune without action is only more wind. I called Raj Patel on the advice of a friend and spent an hour pouring out everything. The stings and slights, the months of being the liability, the way Jason turned my signature into a ship he could scuttle and strand. Raj, quiet and precise, named the things I could not name: financial exploitation, breach of trust. He did not soften for me. He built signposts, then showed me the road out. His gentleness was not the coddle of family, but the mercy of being taken seriously. I began a plan. The ticket would be secured. Mr. Patel handled the legal stealth with formidable calm. The debt would not be repaid by me alone. He would see to that. We would hold for the 90-day privacy window, setting up the trust, the will, the list of actions to come. The envelope, waxy and thick, would never again symbolize fear. It would be the banner of my refusal. And, most crucial, I would not let Jason decide what came next. Not with his plans, not with his men, not with his practiced smile. The injustices mounted through memory, replaying again and again. The bank's impersonal, "Ma'am, the loan is yours now." The friend's gentle hush. Amanda's calculated distance. The way every bill landed at my name, every threat directed to my future. Jason's subtle undoings, his refusal to call it debt, his demand that my loyalty be silent and absolute. Even as the check loomed, the news circled. He expected my submission, the way he'd always expected it, brushed off as family stuff to be handled in private, quietly, by women behind closed pantry doors. The moment of basta, of enough, stole in slowly and then crashed forward with the roar of summer rain against glass. Night after night, I held the velvet pouch, feeling the thickness of the ticket, and whispered my mother's words. "You deserve more than this." With each kindness, each casserole, each donut, each library visit, the old narrative crumbled, and I pieced together a new possibility. Jason's arrival was inevitable. I watched him from behind the curtains, studied his swagger. The news van idled, neighbors peered from azalea bushes, the porch light drew moths in dizzy orbits. I pressed my palm against the envelope, now jacketed in blue velvet, and felt resolve anchor me. I did not owe him this win. I did not owe the world a performance of reconciliation, forgiveness, or spectacle. The woman counting out change for water was owed in some small, fierce way justice. My plan was simple, surgical, and unyielding. Make it impossible for Jason to twist this fortune into more harm. The object, my lottery ticket, tucked within the navy blue pouch, became my shield. Raj's legal structures my armor. My voice, practiced against years of his demands, would hold at the doorway, not yield. I looked at the lines from my own hand, on paper, in the mirror, in the letters I would write to the bank, the authorities, and Jason's lawyer. My own signature, reclaimed. When the knock came, pulsed sharp against the glass, I did not shrink. I opened the door just enough for my voice, and no more. "Not tonight, Jason, not out here. I have an attorney. We'll speak in his office, Friday 10 a.m. He blinked, practiced charm flickering to annoyance, then back to charm. "We have to talk, Mom. This is about family." He made family sound like a password to a safe. The men in suits fidgeted like sharks, scenting opportunity in my hesitation. I pressed the button on my phone. Raj's suggestion, sheriff's office. "There's a crowd outside. My son is trying to force a conversation about newly acquired assets. I need a little peace, for now." My tone, flat, librarian taught, patient with unruly children, cut through Jason's performance. His smile strained as the deputy approached, all small-town ease and polite authority. It was the anchor I needed. For years I had allowed Jason's wishes to rewrite my story, at the cost of my pride, my security, my future. Not tonight. With the ticket secure, my plans set, and the legal net closing gently but firmly, I drew the boundary. No money discussed on the porch, no spectacle for the neighbors, no submission to old scripts. Jason pressed his hand to the glass, lowered his voice, and tried again. "I love you, Mom. You know I'd protect you." But I'd heard that before, as promises became debts, and debts became exile. I softened, not out of obligation but out of memory, for a mother cannot help but recall the boy before the man. "I know you mean that in your way. That's why you'll bring all the paperwork, every slip I ever signed, every email you ever wrote. Friday at Raj's office, I'll hear it all, there, as a person with rights, not a problem to solve." The news crew, their equipment quietly humming, shifted. The deputy smiled. A shared secret between people who have lived through small hurricanes. Mrs. Alvarez's little dog pointed his nose at the sky, then at the retreating backs of Jason's retinue as they moved reluctantly off my porch. Inside, the relief wasn't dramatic. No whoops of victory or tears of shock. I sat at my kitchen table with the velvet pouch beside a mug of chamomile tea. The old photograph of Jason at 7, gap-toothed in a sunbeam, caught the last of the light. I let myself grieve that loss, mourn the mothering I can no longer offer as a blank check. The objects on my table, ticket, velvet pouch, padlocked box, legal folder, arrayed like chess pieces guarding my new life. The injustices of 30 years were not undone, but I was no longer complicit in my own erasure. Friday would come, and with it the slow unwinding, the confrontation, the paperwork, the proof that a line can be drawn and held steady, even in the shifting sand of Florida summers. I locked the pouch away, wiped the counter, and watched the stars wink above palms outside. For the first time in years, the air against my skin was not heavy with dread, but with a ripening hope, a space clearing for whatever comes next. Jason's shadow, for all its looming threats and practiced affection, could no longer dim the new light blooming in the kitchen window, just above a stack of legal forms marked Margaret Collins, sole trustee. Tomorrow, I would wake early. I would visit Louise and bring her sweet tea. I would buy a strong new lock. And come Friday, I would sit across from my son in a glass-walled office, the ticket my symbol of chance, of resolve, of the dignity I'd reclaimed, not as a prop for his ambitions, but as testament to all that I endured, and all that I would no longer allow. Friday arrived damp and gold, the way mornings in Jacksonville sometimes do when the river mist lingers over the city, and you half expect the world to reveal something sweet, if only you open your eyes wide enough. I woke before my alarm, heart beating limber and certain, my mind clear in a way it hadn't been in months. There was quiet, the hush that comes not from absence, but from restful certainty, from the walls and fixtures of a house finally arranged around the shape of my own will. Before breakfast, I wandered to the kitchen and opened the pantry door to retrieve the small fireproof lockbox. The velvet pouch, still cocooning the lottery ticket, snuggled perfectly against the cool metal. Despite everything, I felt a kind of reverence slip into my hands as I turned the key. It was not about the numbers, or the sum, or even the sudden neon brightness of luck breaking through the storm. It was what the ticket had come to mean these past days. A boundary drawn in thick blue ink, a promise kept to myself. I pressed the pouch to my chest just a moment, grounding myself. From the window, I saw a sliver of the azaleas, still begrudging, blooms few and far between, and the neighbors' wind chimes, motionless in the morning air. I smiled, thinking that in Florida, even the wind takes its time. In the quiet, I let myself remember the worried glances in the grocery, Letitia at the motel pressing an extra towel into my palm, the deep kindness in Louise's voice on the phone every evening. Each gesture felt like a thread, weaving something resilient inside me. I was not who I had been a month ago, and that, I realized, was the real miracle, not money, but the slow renewal of faith in my own worth. Louise called first, checking in, but also and especially reminding me, "Don't let him turn this into his story, honey. You walk in holding your head as high as you please." Her Florida drawl calmed me, the way lemon in hot water smooths out the sharpness. "You call me the minute it's done. I want to take you to that little place on the river for shrimp." I dressed carefully, blouse ironed, skirt floral and forgiving, the hospice volunteer pin on my lapel, a small token for courage, its weight familiar and friendly. The drive to Raj Patel's office was short. The Buick bumped along, stubborn and steady. I noticed for the first time how the sunlight dappled the dashboard, gilding even the cracks and worn spots. The city whirred around me with its usual promise of heat and possibility. Raj greeted me at the door, crisp in his bow tie, his hands folded and his smile equal parts welcome and gravity. "Good morning, Mrs. Collins. We're all set up. You have your support documents?" I nodded, pressing my tote closed around the lockbox and folder. "I brought everything. Thank you, Mr. Patel." Inside, the conference room gleamed a little too bright, the sort of glass-walled formality designed to inspire awe and caution in equal measure. Across the polished table, Jason sat, flanked by the bearded men, his strategists, and a woman with an iPad. My son's face was sharp today, tension drawn into the lines around his eyes, but I saw flickers beneath, nervousness, hope, something fragile that once was his faith in me. He wore a blue shirt, the same shade as the ocean in a childhood photo I kept by my bed. "Morning, Mom," he said, soft, some of the bravado from our porch worn away by sleep or perhaps the nearness of officialdom. "Good morning, Jason." I met his gaze, the way I had learned to in the library with worn-out teachers and anxious children, kind but unflinching. "Let's get started." Raj, poised and precise, led us through each page, the list of debts, the trust agreement, the evidence of the bridge loan and its real intent. Facts laid out in plain language, the paper trail sorted into neat, unarguable stacks. When Jason tried to nudge the conversation toward options and family solutions, Raj redirected, "We'll be focusing on Margaret's security and outcomes today." There were tense breaths, a few muttered calculations between Jason and his men, hints of old guilt rising and falling like the tide. I heard him say, "But I thought, you always said you'd help." To which I replied, gently but firmly, "I did help, and I will always root for you, Jason. But I won't let you use my name as collateral again. That's not love. That's not family. We're both old enough to know the difference." There was a gentle ache as the old roles tugged at me. The urge to soften, to excuse, to fold myself smaller so he could be large. But I stayed the course, hands flat to the table, chin lifted, infusing my silence with the steadiness I had been cultivating these long weeks. Raj's language filled the spaces where I might once have rushed to soothe. When we spoke of repayment, I asked simply, "Are you willing to draw up a plan to return the money you borrowed? In installments, if necessary?" There were murmurs, shifting feet, and finally a nod. "I am," Jason said, voice breaking just a little. The men typed on their phones. The air felt heavy with truth and possibility. As the meeting closed, I slid the velvet pouch onto the table. "This is for you to see, Jason. One time, and then only at a distance. The trust holds it now. It isn't a patch for old debts or a prize for endurance. It's a sign that life remains bigger than our mistakes." He stared, mouth taut, jaw working as if wrestling with regret. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. It was the apology I had waited decades to hear. Not an excuse, not a prop for his narrative, but an admission of harm done, responsibility claimed. "I forgive you." "But I forgive myself too," I replied, my throat thick. "We don't have to keep living in the hurt. We can choose different, starting now." And just like that, some old hardness inside me softened. Not completely, but enough to let in a new shape, flexible but not weak. The papers were signed, the trust was sealed, the attorney witnessed every word. Jason turned away tearful, and the sight ached, but the weight, the anchor of his ambition, was finally off my chest. When they left, Raj silently pressed tea into my hands. He knew not to fill the hush with advice or praise. "You did what was needed." "Not many do, Margaret." His voice was low, steady. "Take care of yourself now." I stepped outside, blinking against the white daylight, and called Louise. "It's done," I said, voice trembling but bright. "Lunch by the river?" "Oh, honey, I'll pick you up in 20. I'm bringing my biggest hat, and you're bringing that smile." We sat under the striped canopy, the breeze off the Matanzas River sticky with salt and story. Shrimp baskets arrived, iced tea sweating in mason jars, a slice of key lime pie bright and impossible yellow. I let Louise fuss over my hair, cackle at her own jokes, and recount, to my astonishment, how most of the congregation had been rooting for me all along. "You never know how many are in your corner until your trouble goes public," she said, winking. That afternoon, I went home and set about the little rituals that make a house feel safe again. Watering the reluctant geraniums on the porch, making a fresh pitcher of sweet tea, rearranging the cookbooks back on their shelf. Then, with the house gentle around me, I took out the velvet pouch one last time. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had prayed, wept, planned, and lost myself a little each day these past years. I laid the ticket in my palm, felt its thickness, its waxy imprint, the strange poetry of hope and agency. For a moment, I closed my eyes and reached into the memory of that night in the 7-Eleven, the stranger's painted hands, the sound of rain smacking the glass. Her words came back to me. The universe keeps tallies. And I thought, even the universe needs a nudge sometimes, a reminder, a mother willing to sign her own name into a new future. From this point forward, this ticket became not a promise of riches or a repayment of suffering, but a token, a symbol that even after profound betrayal, dignity can be restored in increments and self-respect can outlast humiliation. I would tell my story not as one of survival alone, but of transformation, a woman who learned to step out from the margin and claim space on the main stage of her own life. In the weeks that followed, the headlines faded, the neighbors' whispers died down, and the rhythm of small, good days returned. I bought a new taillight for the Buick. I started the scholarship in my husband's name at the local school. I rebuilt my garden, this time stubbornly planting azaleas again, hoping, like always, for at least one beautiful bloom. Jason called me, sometimes tentatively, sometimes with the bravado I knew so well. But our conversations, though not perfect, took on a new shape. Forgiveness softens. It doesn't erase. We spoke of his daughter, my granddaughter, books she might love, and how sometimes hard stories have chapters that change everything. There are wounds that take years to close, but they heal all the same if tended with honesty and boundaries. Some nights I still took out the velvet pouch, letting my fingers run over the now creased ticket. It was my passport, not to a future of luxury, but to one of peace, agency, and gentle possibility. Sometimes I would whisper its secret out loud. This is for me, and I believed it. To anyone listening who feels their story is trapped inside someone else's narrative, who wonders whether luck or justice or even simple decency will ever return, know this. You are allowed to reclaim your own name. Even after the longest stretch of disappointment, after betrayals that make you feel unmade, a new beginning is possible. The world does not always offer second chances, but sometimes you can carve one out of grit, out of kindness, out of a stubborn, pulsating hope. If my story moved you, if you've walked through your own storms and found a way to the light, I hope you'll share something in the comments. We grow stronger in community, in witness, in honest company. And if you've ever doubted your own worth, let this be your gentle reminder. You are enough, right now, as you are. I'd love to have you stay with me. Please click like, subscribe, and share your story below. Let's keep building this brave, beautiful space, one small kindness at a time. Sometimes all it takes is a single, unexpected turn, a waxy strip of paper, a blue velvet pouch, the echo of your own name said with pride, to remind you that everything broken can be rebuilt. And sometimes, the brightest light is the one you learn to kindle quietly, for yourself, behind your own front door.